Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
This is the Daily Memphian Politics Podcast. I'm Bill Dries. Our main event is the ethics reform proposal Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris is about to make to the Shelby County Commission. Top of the podcast, the city's tax rate set at $2.71, the rate set by the state and calculated to produce the same amount of revenue as the pre-reappraisal rate of $3.19. The Memphis City Council closing out its budget season this past week with a few amendments to the Strickland administration budget. That includes one by Councilmember Chase Carlisle, $1 million for 29 more police take-home cars to go to patrol officers who live in the city and agree to park the cars on the streets or in a driveway so that they can be seen. Struck down before it even got to the floor, a 31-cent property tax hike proposed by Councilmember Martavius Jones. It would have increased city funding to MATA, the Memphis Area Transit Authority, by $10 million, with 3% pay raises for all city employees coming in at $14 million. Jones could not even get a suspension of the rules to get his proposal to a vote. He was the only yes vote on the suspension. The Shelby County Commission takes its final vote with public notice June 21st on a property tax rate of $3.46, a penny above the state rate. Collierville's new tax rate is $1.72, a 15-cent tax hike above the $1.55 set by the state as the recertified rate. Arlington's first reading property tax rate is $1.28. 13 cents over the recertified rate. The Bartlett Board of Mayor and Aldermen take a final vote June 28th. The rate to be voted on there is $1.75, a 24-cent tax hike over the recertified rate after reappraisal of $1.51. That same day, Germantown votes on a property tax rate of $1.68, which is the state rate. Lakeland has a tax rate of $1.04, which is also the state's recertified rate. Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff back in the city, this time for a stop in Douglas Park to push for more COVID vaccinations. Emhoff and U.S. Labor Secretary Martin Walsh were here in May, you may remember, to push for the Biden administration's infrastructure plans. For many Memphians, Douglas Park has been the home of Juneteenth before Juneteenth was cool, and Juneteenth observances will be back this coming weekend of the 19th there and in other places, including Health Sciences Park. The observance marking the end of slavery at Health Sciences Park Friday and Saturday will come almost 2 weeks after the remains of Confederate general, slave trader, and Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard Nathan Bedford Forrest were removed from the park, once named in Forrest honor. The disinterment got off to a tense start on June 1st, leading to the arrest on an assault charge of the leader of Confederate 901, George K. Rag Johnson of Byhalia, for threatening County Commissioner Tammy Sawyer. The remains of Forrest and his wife were found about where they were expected to be a week later. The removal was not made public until 5 days after that, with Greenspace CEO Van Turner and Sons of Confederate Veterans leader Lee Miller announcing the milestone together in the park. The funeral director overseeing the disinterment, Brent Taylor, a former Memphis City Council member and Shelby County Commissioner, as well as the current chairman of the Shelby County Election Commission. The Strickland administration moving dirt this past week at the fairgrounds, marking 14 years and 3 mayoral administrations in search of a plan for an overhaul of the city property that has a much longer civic history. Liberty Park is underway, starting with the Centerpiece Youth Sports Complex, about where Liberty Land used to be, and plenty of the trees in the amusement park footprint coming down as a result. The idea of hosting youth sports tournaments was there from the beginning, but even it changed from a much more comprehensive undertaking to a more strategic approach with an eye on other youth sports sites in the region. General Sessions Court Judge John Donald retiring next month. Just another reminder that 2022 is the year of the big ballot in Memphis politics, including judicial races with an 8-year term like General Sessions Court Judge. Shelby County Commissioners could fill Donald's vacancy and give someone a big political boost in the 2022 race with the appointment, or they could leave the division empty until the August county general election next year, or they could find a retired judge with no intention of running who still has the itch to wear a robe. Speaking of judges, Judge Joe Brown, the retired Shelby County Criminal Court judge who became a syndicated television judge, says he is running for mayor. Not county mayor next year, but Memphis mayor in 2023. Brown's last political outing was in the 2014 county elections as the Democratic nominee for District Attorney General and keeper of local Democratic hopes at that time that his name recognition would reverse the 2010 Republican sweep of countywide offices on that ballot. That did not happen. Brown spent much of the campaign talking about juvenile court to the extent that a lot of people thought that's what he was running for instead of district attorney. Now, here's a roundup of what's in the Harris Ethics Reform proposal on the county side and what is not. Currently, commissioners, like their counterparts on the city council, only have to disclose a potential conflict of interest before voting on a matter. They do not have to recuse themselves in most of those cases unless there is a, quote, direct personal interest, and that has proven to be subject to broad interpretation. That's already in the county ordinance without the proposed amendments. Otherwise, they can choose to recuse themselves voluntarily. And usually a recusal follows a direct statement from the county attorney's office that there is a conflict of interest. Well, there's certain to be some questioning of the difference between a conflict of interest and a perceived conflict of interest. The difference usually determines whether a commissioner will go ahead and vote on the matter. Ultimately, that is still up to the judgment of the commissioner in the amendments. The commissioner can either disclose and not take part in the discussion of the item, or withdraw as a sponsor of the item, or simply recuse themselves from voting on the matter. If this goes to the Ethics Commission, the person accused of a conflict of interest can make the case that they disclosed in a timely manner their personal interest in a public meeting or sincerely believed in good faith that recusal was not required. This also introduces relatives and family members to the conflict of interest question, establishing family for purposes of the ordinance as those in the household of an elected or appointed county official. Those who fall under that definition and are hired by the county have an obligation to tell their supervisor or the human resources director that they are related to someone they are reporting to at work or that they're related to someone they're supervising. No participation by a county elected official, employee, or appointee in securing a county contract with a relative. The amendments also establish a 1-year cooling off period, as you will hear Harris refer to it, in which those leaving county service cannot work for or use their knowledge of county government for 1 year to benefit an entity with business before the county. The exception by the amendment is having left county government and helping the county, another government entity or agency, or a nonprofit organization. If there's a violation of the cooling off period, the business transaction involved could be declared null and void by the county. The amendments include encouraging contractors to report corruption and lessening the number of attorney positions on the County Ethics Commission. The reforms also include a provision to remove a commissioner from the chairmanship of the body or the chairmanship of a committee if that commissioner is indicted or convicted of a crime related to their tenure on the body. The commission would have a tighter time frame to consider and possibly take that action, a 14-day period from the indictment or conviction in which to vote. The current time frame for such a decision is 21 days. No county official, employee, or appointee could enter into talks about working for a person, business, or organization that has a county government matter pending before them. The exception is if it's another government entity. And county commissioners, by virtue of being part-time county employees, may have full-time jobs elsewhere that have incidental contact with the county if that job is their primary source of income. That job has to be disclosed as required by state law. This is the first of several efforts to change county ethics regulations. Next up is campaign finance disclosures, and beyond that will be proposed reforms of county commissioners awarding grants from a $2.6 million fund that is allocated at $200,000 per commissioner. Joining us now, Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris and Alex Hensley, Special Assistant to the Mayor, and we're here to talk about the administration's proposal to change ethics rules for county officials and county government in general. We've gone over the specific points at the top of the podcast, so let's wade into this. First of all, what prompted this?
So I think a couple of things to start. Number one is we need to make sure that our approach to ethics is mirrors the best practices from around the country. And so we canvassed those ethics chapters from around the country to make sure that everything in Shelby County was up to date. That also gives us an opportunity to not just check for best practices, but also to re-engage the community around what they want to see in terms of their government, ways to build public trust and to restore fairness. The other piece of this is just everyday citizen involvement, is that some of the changes we have made do permit everyday citizens to participate in the process of addressing ethical lapses. And so that was important to get everyday citizens involved. And so those were the things that were on our minds as we took a very careful review of the ethics chapter here in Shelby County and have now are ready to move forward a series of reforms.
Okay. And talking about citizens being involved in it, I believe that the Ethics Code currently has a provision in it that says a citizen cannot file an ethics complaint within a certain amount of time just before an election. Am I right on that?
So I'll let Alex answer that. Go ahead.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I think that the work that we're trying to do here is to ensure that there are more avenues for reporting ethics complaints to the Ethics Commission. So, for example, we have created a strong encouragement for county contractors to report ethical violations. And this just ensures that there are more avenues to report conflicts of interest and encourages county contractors, to be mindful of unethical action by public officials. And so I think there is that aspect. And I think that additionally, as far as our goals for the ordinance, every Shelby County resident should have a fair shot at advocating for themselves and for their neighbors. And so when public officials use insider knowledge, to shape public policy on behalf of special interest, it can threaten the integrity of public service. So I think what we're seeking to do here is to create more avenues for citizens to feel more trust in county government.
Mm-hmm. And currently, the rule on the county side as well as the city side is that if there is a potential conflict of interest, to disclose that. But in most cases, that does not require that someone recuse themselves from voting on the matter in question. Why not go a step further and say you can't vote on the matter either? Not optional, you just can't vote on it because there is this conflict of interest.
No, I think that's right. And we took a really close look at that part of our ethics chapter, and we have updates to that part of our ethics chapter. And that's exactly what the reform would do if it's approved by the commission. So if there is a direct conflict of interest, and conflict of interest really means financial interest, then the elected official would be precluded from voting on that particular item. In addition, under the reform we're advancing, that elected official would also be prevented from sponsoring that item for which there is a financial interest or a conflict of interest. We've also, in addition to that, proposed a cooling off period. So that is to say that if an elected official develops a financial interest in an item after their service or after they have participated substantially in a transaction on behalf of the county, that they've got a mandatory 1-year cooling off period before they use that insider knowledge gained when they worked for the county to then privately benefit, as it were. So we have gone in and we've updated that to make sure that sponsorship, voting, and so forth are all included in conflicted items, and we've added a 1-year cooling off period.
All right. And Alex, in drafting these changes, this language is very specific because elected officials and I believe appointed officials as well, they pay very close attention to the details on this. But I would imagine it's a balance because at the same time, you want citizens to be able to read this and understand it too.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And we've spent a lot of time working through these details. Like the mayor said, we've looked at best practices across the country to form some of these amendments. And so, we think it's really important to bring this ethics ordinance up to date. It's been 2014 since there's been a significant update to the ordinance. And this is an opportunity to provide a significant update when, we see in places across the country that typically happens every few years, if not every single year. So we've done a lot of work over the last several months to get to a place where we can provide a significant update and therefore hopefully, continue to build public trust in government.
So has any recent behavior informed the draft version that's going to the county commission on this?
So no, this is not about a particular commission or a particular commissioner. It really is the idea that you've got to go in and look at your approach to ethics every few years. In addition, I should mention that this is our phase 1 review. So in addition to this, we're also taking a close look at our approach to campaign finance because the two typically go hand in hand, ethics and campaign finance reforms. And so this is the first phase. We're hopeful to get in front of the county commission and get this done because it is sorely needed because it's been so many years in the making. And then we'll shift our focus to campaign finance reforms as well. The other piece, though, that is kind of that is a little bit more relevant to this commission is just the size and structure of the Ethics Commission. And so ethics complaints in Shelby County go before the Ethics Commission typically. And that Ethics Commission is a 13-member body. It is really, and it doesn't do as much as it could to encourage average citizen participation. So there's a requirement for lawyers and for judges. And so one part of the reforms that we've proposed here is to shrink that Ethics Commission, to make the Ethics Commission a little more functional and user-friendly, and to encourage a greater percentage of the Ethics Commission members to be everyday citizens and not necessarily lawyers or judges. So, it's something that we're going to put in front of this county commission here soon. But as you know, anytime the regulation applies to elected officials, it gets a real close look.
Sure.
Scrutiny. But we're hopeful that everyone will see the time put in this, the external engagement. We've talked to lots of experts along the way, and be ready to make some reform.
Right. And there is a lot of the provisions that I read seem to deal with specific instances where grants from the county commission might be involved. And this is a relatively new thing for the commission to have these grants. So how does this flesh out how those grants are to be handled?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, it can address grants, but I think it can also address contracts. It can address any kind of action that the commission takes, but not just the commission, it's appointees and employees in public government. Just that we should be considerate and mindful and of special connections or special insider knowledge that we gain dealing with those transactions. And specifically, this has to deal with if a public official is significantly involved in securing that contract. So if I have my hands on it, I cannot then, go after I, in my termination or in the term, I can't turn around and represent someone against the county. I can't assist someone in that process having the knowledge that I've had before. So I think this just provides a little more, like the mayor said, a cooling off period, which puts some distance between some of the insights that we gain and the connections that we gain in public office.
Is significantly involved, does that mean a former elected or appointed official who is a subcontractor on a general contract?
Yeah, that's right. So it would be their involvement with Shelby County government. So yeah, if that subcontract ended up putting them back in involvement with Shelby County government, then we would have a cooling off period given their service in Shelby County government and their access potentially to insider information as they represented and acted on behalf of Shelby County government. Mm-hmm. The other piece of it, in addition to the cooling off period, which again is new, and we're happy to receive the commissioner feedback as we go through this process. The other piece of this is the nepotism piece to make sure that, as you put it, contracts and other kinds of interests are not shifted toward relatives without a disclosure and a process around that. And so we went in and made sure that our definition of relatives made sense and that there were regulations around nepotism or awarding contracts to relatives or people in your household.
Right. And Alex, I believe that you relied on basically a definition that goes to the last part of what the mayor said, that this is defined as someone who is a member of the elected official's household, right?
Yes, that's right. A qualified relative.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so that's a spouse, a child, a parent, specifically that, a county official could not go and try to secure a contract, perform a transaction with someone that is in their household.
Mm-hmm. Mayor, are you satisfied with the way the commission awards grants presently?
No, I think that there's probably reform in order with respect to the grant making process. And I think this is part of that. The ethics chapter is a great place to start that conversation. And so, again, we'll work with the commissioner, and Van Turner has agreed to sponsor this item. So we'll work with Commissioner Turner and the rest of the commissioners to make sure we get the reforms to the ethics chapter right. But as you say, there are also another set of rules. I think they're just policies adopted by the commission from year to year around grants and grant amounts and all sorts of issues like that. I think those also would stand closer scrutiny. And no, I think the process is going to be reform.
Okay. The city council, as you know, Mayor, has a provision that allows for the automatic suspension of a council member who is indicted or charged with a crime connected to their office. This proposal says a county commissioner can lose a chairmanship of a committee if that happens, I believe. I've seen these debates before. So is it proper to remove an elected official from their duties before they are judged guilty or not guilty?
So, yeah, that's a tricky issue. And so where we landed for this particular reform was toughening the current restriction. So the current rule and under our ethics chapter is that the commission has to have a vote if there is a scandal. That is, if you're indicted or you're convicted of a crime of bribery or other kind of fraudulent crime, that commissioner would be voted on by the commission about whether or not they can continue to serve as chair. The problem with the current chapter, as it's worded right now, is that wouldn't happen for 2 months. And so we went in and made sure that was more immediate. That is, if there is a scandal, if a commissioner is indicted or convicted of a serious crime, then the commission would have to act to determine how to proceed nearly immediately. I think we put a 14-day time limit on it. And so that makes it a little closer to the event and creates a little bit more accountability. And I think that's the way to go. And so they wouldn't necessarily be thrown out of their chairmanship. What would happen is there would be a vote teed up, and that vote would be around those kinds of issues. So it would not be an automatic termination of anything, their seat or their chairmanship. It would just set up a vote for those kinds of decisions to be made. And so I'm very comfortable with a vote occurring on a body after there has been an indictment or a conviction of a serious crime.
And is there a range of actions that the commission could take in that instance?
So in this instance, this addresses, the mayor talked about this, an indictment or a conviction of a commissioner for state or federal offenses, with extortion, embezzlement, and theft of funds or property. And so this would allow the commission, again, to vote within 10 days. Because because of the seriousness of these crimes, the commission should be able to vote on whether the commissioner should continue to be chair of the commission or continue to be chair of their committees. But I do think that there are a range of options, not just in this instance, but just through the Ethics Commission. There are a range of options if the Ethics Commission brings a complaint to the commission that they could take to approach the ethics complaints.
All right. We will look for further action on that. While I have you both here, I want to ask you about the Byhalia Connection pipeline. This has kind of taken a break while everybody's been in budget season. What can you tell me about how that is moving? Mayor, your ordinance to change the rules on the Unified Development Code to set setbacks of 1,500 feet for these pipelines was about to go to a third and final vote. That's been delayed. Where is the process now?
So we expect that the restrictions around pipelines will come forward again after this delay in July. And we're talking to commissioners and frankly, talking to council members about the importance of making sure that we have best practices when it comes to pipelines and that we understand any risk associated with pipelines. So I am in close communication with Council Member Warren, who has proposed an ordinance that would protect the aquifer from unnecessary risks that could be associated with pipelines. And as you have said, we have followed the process and brought forward an additional ordinance that would create a setback away from homes and away from historic neighborhoods with respect to all pipelines. And so our ordinance and Jeff Warren's ordinance is making its way through the process. I think if we have a message here, our message is merely that we have to follow this process. I know that there are lots of interests at stake, but this delay and what appears to be a special process here is something that worries me. I believe that the folks who live in the Ford Road area and care about the communities like Boxtown and Westwood and South Memphis, those communities need to have faith in government and have faith in the process. And the process calls for a recommendation, at least in our case, of the Land Use Control Board. We have received that. The process calls for votes by the county commission and the city council respectively. And that has somehow been derailed or delayed for the time being. And that worries me. We can't say, well, if it's a big company or a small community, there's going to be this set of process. And for others, there will be another set of process. Let's get back to the process. Let's have these readings. Let's have these votes. And if our conscience demands it, let's give the folks in the Ford Road area the result that they want to see.
So there are delays in government action, but in cases that involve an issue like this, that doesn't necessarily mean there is an end to a movement. And the pipeline company has said that they will be exploring other routes for the pipeline potentially. Are you worried about that? Is that something that you've talked to the pipeline companies about?
So I think, like the mayor said, that there's no requirement to provide more notice or more time to corporations oil and gas companies are special interest. And so there's, we've been working on this for several months now, and there has to be public notice before the Land Use Control Board. There has to be public notice before the ordinance, and there has to be 3 readings. And so the task before us, I think, is to advocate for the people that live in these communities and to ensure, at the very least, that there's a public debate on the construction of pipelines in Shelby County. And so the community has continued to sound the alarm at every level of government. And there was an attempt to delay our ordinance before the Land Use Control Board, before we even got there. And what I said then, and what I think is still true now, is that what we risk with a delay is a company with significantly more resources than our communities to use those resources to mount a case for a pipeline. And so I think that is concerning. And so to go back to ethics, good governance happens when our constituents, like the mayor said, can trust that we're advocating on their behalf and that we won't lose sight of their interests. So we're really risking public trust when we delay on significant issues like the construction of oil pipelines.
So third and final reading on the Unified Development Code part of this, the setbacks, is that still scheduled for July?
We hope so. That's our message to commissioners, is follow the process, and the public has demanded a debate around how we respond to pipeline construction. We have followed that process by putting forward some of the best ideas around how to regulate pipelines in local communities, and that debate needs to be heard. So we're hopeful that what has happened so far is merely a delay and nothing more, and not really an effort to derail this and go back to the business as usual, business as usual, which sometimes means that the public doesn't get the public debate they deserve on issues that matter to community.
Mm-hmm. A final point. We've heard throughout this discussion from the pipeline companies that there are a lot of pipelines that already exist below the surface of our city and of our county. Do you think we've adequately regulated those? And is that a precedent that should affect the decision that's made on the Byhalia Connection pipeline?
So I think what we have to focus on is what we can do in the future, and that's what we can do with a land use ordinance. We can't go back and necessarily pull up a pipeline. So I think what we're focused on is the 1,500-foot setback requirement. And I think that's the bare minimum that we can do to protect areas like schools and homes and parks and churches where there usually are a lot of people. Those are dense areas. Those are called high consequence areas by the Department of Transportation. And so we have to do everything we can to protect those high density areas from the impact of an oil spill. And some oil spills have impacted miles of land. So we're talking about 1,500 feet. That's a third of a mile. We think this is a good start. The Plains All-American spill in California polluted 9 miles of the Santa Barbara coast within 24 hours. So I think, we've got to protect our children. We've got to protect our faith communities. We've got to protect our families. And so I think that's what we're trying to do here and trying to move forward on.
Yeah, and remember, Bill, these are historic communities. We have some of the earliest communities for ex-slaves here where the pipeline construction is contemplated. We've got the Ernest Withers Home and Museum nearby where this is contemplated. We have schools in this area. And so all of these issues, even the issue you talked about, is how does this impact other pipelines that are already been laid? And as Alex says, it doesn't affect them at all. But all of these kinds of considerations need to be brought forward for a public debate in front of the commission and even the city council, because this is the job, right? This is the job. The job is to reflect the will of what is happening in the community and in the neighborhoods. And so far we've punted, and I'm hoping we get back to business of listening to the community, which has clearly told us that they want to make sure that there is no unnecessary risk to neighborhoods when it comes to pipelines.
All right. We will see what happens next on both of these fronts, the pipeline and ethics reform as well. We've been talking with Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris and Alex Hensley, Special Assistant to the Mayor. Our guest on WKNO's Behind the Headlines this week, Collierville Mayor Stan Joyner and Bartlett Mayor Keith McDonald on budget season in the suburbs and tax hikes this budget season in Collierville and Bartlett. You can also hear the show on our Behind the Headlines podcast. Subscribe to the Daily Memphian at dailymemphian.com. Subscribe to this podcast and our others at Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I'm Bill Dries. The Daily Memphian Politics Podcast is produced by Natalie and Chandler Van Gundy.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.